The narrator relates how Hamet Benengeli begins the 8th chapter with thanksgivings to Allah at having Don Quixote and Sancho, fairly afield, now, and going to El Toboso, traveling all night. Some religiosity and other matters are expressed between Don Quixote and Sancho, with Sancho getting at that he thinks they should be better off by being canonized and beatified. They reach the city at daybreak and they decide to enter at nightfall, with Sancho aware that his Dulcinea story to Don Quixote was a complete fabrication, and again with good reason sensing a major problem. Are we going, do you fancy, to the house of our wenches, like gallants who come and knock and go in at any hour, however late it may be? The place is asleep and dark, with the sounds of an intruder from animals heard, and the matter absurd, but a bad omen spooks Quixote into retreat, and they leave before daybreak. Soon and yet to come, when a Duke and Duchess encounter the duo, they already know their famous history, and they themselves, very fond of books of chivalry, plan to fall in with his humor and agree to everything he said, in accepting his advancements, and then their terrible dismount, setting forth a string of imagined adventures resulting in a series of practical jokes. Some of them put Don Quixote's sense of chivalry and his devotion to Dulcinea through many tests. Now pressed into finding Dulcinea, Sancho is sent out alone again as a go-between with Dulcinea and decides they are both mad here, but as for Don Quixote, with a madness that mostly takes one thing for another, and plans to persuade him into seeing Dulcinea as a sublimated presence, of a sorts. Sancho's luck brings 3 focusing peasant girls along the road he was sitting not far from where he set out from, and he quickly tells Don Quixote that they are Dulcinea and her ladies-in-waiting, and as beautiful as ever, as they get unwittingly involved with the duo. As Don Quixote always only sees the peasant girls. But open your eyes, and come and pay your respects to the lady of your thoughts. Carrying on for their part. Hey day, my grandfather. Quote, Sancho always pretends, reversing some incidents of part 1 and keeping to his plan, that their appearance is as Sancho is perceiving it, as he explains its magnificent qualities, and must be an enchantment of some sort at work here. Don Quixote's usual and predictable kind of belief in this matter results in Sancho, the rogue, having nicely befooled him into thinking he met Dulcinea controlled by enchantment, but delivered by Sancho. Don Quixote then has the opportunity to purport that, for from a child I was fond of the play, and in my youth a keen lover of the actor's art, while with players of a company, and for him thus far an unusually high regard for poetry when with Don Diego de Miranda. She is the product of an alchemy of such virtue that he who is able to practice it will turn her into pure gold of inestimable worth, sublime conceptions. Don Quixote makes to the other world and somehow meets his fictional characters at return, reversing the timestamp of the usual event and with a possible apocryphal example as one of his deeds. Don Quixote joins into a puppet troupe. Melisendra was Melisendra, Don Gayferos Don Gayferos, Marsilio Marsilio, and Charlemagne Charlemagne. Quote, having created a lasting false premise for them. Sancho later gets his comeuppance for this when, as part of one of the Duke and Duchess pranks, the two are led to believe that the only method to release Dulcinea from this spell, if among possibilities under consideration, she has been changed rather than Don Quixote's perception has been enchanted, which at one point he explains is not possible, however, is for Sancho to give himself 3,300 lashes. Sancho naturally resists this course of action, leading to friction with his master. Under the Duke's patronage, Sancho eventually gets a governorship, though it is false, and he proves to be a wise and practical ruler, although this ends in humiliation as well. Near the end, Don Quixote reluctantly sways towards sanity. Quote, "The lengthy untold history of Don Quixote's adventures in knight-errantry comes to a close after his battle with the Knight of the White Moon, a young man from Don Quixote's hometown who had previously posed as the Knight of Mirrors on the beach in Barcelona, in which the reader finds him conquered, bound by the rules of chivalry. Don Quixote submits to pre-arranged terms that the vanquished is to obey the will of the conqueror. Here, it is that Don Quixote is to lay down his arms and cease his acts of chivalry for the period of 1 year, in which he may be cured of his madness. He and Sancho undergo one more prank that night by the Duke and Duchess before setting off. A play-like event, though perceived as mostly real life by Sancho and Don Quixote, over Altisidora's required remedy from death, over her love for Don Quixote. Print on Sancho's face 4 smacks, and give him 12 pinches and 6 pin thrusts in the back and arms. Altisidora is first to visit in the morning, taking away Don Quixote's usual way for a moment or two, being back from the dead. But her story of the experience quickly snaps him back into his usual mode. Some others come around and it is decided to part that day. The duped Don Quixote did not miss a single stroke of the count. Quote, "Beyond measure joyful. A once nearly deadly confrontation for them. On the way back home. Along with some other situations maybe of note. Don Quixote and Sancho resolve the disenchantment of Dulcinea. Being fresh from his success with Altisidora. Upon returning to his village, Don Quixote announces his plan to retire to the countryside as a shepherd. Considered an erudite bunch for the most part. But his housekeeper urges him to stay at home. Soon after, he retires to his bed with a deathly illness, and later awakes from a dream, having fully become good. Sancho's character tries to restore his faith and/or his interest of a disenchanted Dulcinea. But the Quixana character, will have it his surname, for here there is some difference of opinion among the authors who write on the subject. It seems plain that he was called Quixana. Only renounces his previous ambition and apologizes for the harm he has caused. He dictates his will, which includes a provision that his niece will be disinherited if she marries a man who reads books of chivalry. After the Quixana character dies, the author emphasizes that there are no more adventures to relate and that any further books about Don Quixote would be spurious.